Thank you very much, Sarah. Very much appreciate the support of a good corporate like Coles. And now for the main meal. You thought you've had your main meal, but Christine Nixon is actually the main meal. Christine was the first woman in Australia to achieve the rank of Chief Commissioner of Police, leading the Victorian Police Force from 2001 to 2009. She led a staff of 14,000 people, which rolls off the tongue, but that would be 14,000 challenging people to lead, I'm sure, of which one of our CPA people, Jenny Peachy, was one. So she would have been the most problematic, was she, Christine? No? After leaving the police, she became Chair of the Victorian Bushfire Recovery Authority, stepping down in 2010. Christine is currently Deputy Chancellor of Monash University, Chair of Monash College and Chair of Good Shepherd Microfinance, which Christine was filling us in with some very interesting stories about that organisation over lunch. She's a Fellow of ANZ, SOG, IPAA, AIPM and AIM. Christine was recently interviewed by Alex Melly on the television series The Bottom Line earlier this year. Christine has also been nominated for the 2014 Australian Financial Review and Westpac 100 Women of Influence Awards. For some reason they rejected my application, Christine, but anyway, we won't go into that. Christine will reflect on her own career to discuss effective leadership styles that she has witnessed through her many leadership roles. She will identify some key challenges all leaders face today and ideas on how to tackle these problems. So not only will she talk about her style of leadership, she'll talk about the leadership she's observed in others that she's worked with. So I implore you to welcome Christine Nixon for what will be a wonderful session at Congress. Thank you. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Graham, for that very nice introduction. And to Therese and to Sarah, thank you for that. I should say, just before I start, that having the relationship with GJ Coles & Co., I was a young 14-year-old who went to work for Coles when, as Graham remembers it, I'm sure Sarah does, and I think you're a bit young. But I used to work for them. I worked when I was 14 until I was about 18. And maybe it's kind of relevant that I kind of talk about this piece because I'd worked on all of the counters and worked in the office and did the pays, etc. And I got to be 18 and wondered what I might do. And someone said, well, you know, you could look for the management stream in Coles. So I talked to the Coles people and they said, oh, sorry, Christine, we don't have women in the management stream. And so I often think to myself where I might have ended up if, in fact, you know, that sort of opportunity might have been available to me then. That's just a side issue. That's not what I plan to talk about. Can I pay my respects, please, to the traditional owners of this land on which we gather today, the Wurundjeri people, to any elders who are here and those who are past. I've been in this place a number of times and I've listened to Aboriginal elders welcome people. And I always found it a very interesting part of understanding history and understanding the knowledge and an amazing background of the Aboriginal people. And so I do like to pay my respects to them as well. To CPA, I've had a reasonably long relationship, and particularly having recently been on The Bottom Line, which I found Alex is a really nice interrogator. He's not like the Herald Sun. And so I was really happy, you know, that Alex was not waiting to get you know, whatever it might have been. So happy to be here today and part of this luncheon. I wanted to say a couple of things. Just I know that many of you, when I looked at some of your backgrounds, I didn't really look at all your backgrounds, just some. It's my old job, we used to look at that. That I did, just to give you some sense of where I come from, I suppose, instead of joining Coles, I actually joined the New South Wales Police back in 72, a long time ago. And it was a very interesting experience in the New South Wales Police. There were 130 women and 8,000 men when I joined. So through the time of the 70s, I learned a lot about change. I became the president of the Women Police Branch. I was the first woman to work in operational policing. and a part of, I guess, the new way of doing things and pushing for boundaries to change. And so I learned a lot in the 70s around that, and then in the 80s I continued education part-time. I ended up winning an American Foundation scholarship, which paid for me to go to Harvard University, and I studied there in the 80s for a couple of years, and then came back and was part of working with the then Commissioner on reforming the New South Wales Police. And the person who'd become the Commissioner at the time was the most unlikely candidate. His name was John Avery. Very quiet, shy, retiring man, very different to the people who'd led policing before. And I learned a lot about you didn't have to be of a particular kind of behaviour or particular sort of background to be a leader. And he taught me a lot in the 80s. In the 90s, I got to manage people. I got to become the first Assistant Commissioner in the New South Wales Police. I was female. I managed education and policy around human resources, those sorts of issues as well. And we had a Royal Commission for 3 years. Those of you who know me from Victoria would know I'm not keen about Royal Commissions for a range of reasons. And I ended up sort of being running HR during that time, which was a very difficult time. And then eventually ran operational regions in the north of Sydney, in the western suburbs of Sydney, and then the south. And of course, in 2001, came to Victoria. And people often say to me, how'd you get the Victorian job? I applied. Nobody came and asked me. Nobody headhunted me. Nobody did anything else. I just simply went through the process like anybody could. And then I came to understand how many people had applied. Of course, the Herald Sun told me. In a confidential process. So it's nice to know who the opposition is. And I figured, they weren't any smarter than me. And I went through the process and eventually got a call and said, congratulations. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what have I done now? And so that was back in 2001. And coming to Victoria, I literally did not know anybody in the Victoria Police. And very few people actually in Victoria that I knew. So then I went through till 2009 as the Chief Commissioner. And then I was asked by the then Prime Minister and the Premier. I was finishing in policing and had given notice in the November 2008 and came to the point, and I was in Marysville at the time of the fires, and Kevin Rudd had come through Marysville in the morning and John Brumby was there in the afternoon, and he asked me to come outside. He said, Christine, what do you plan on doing when you finish up and you retire? I said, I'm going to get a life. I'm going to go to France and spend some time there. And he said, we'd like you to chair the Bushfire Reconstruction and Recovery Authority. And I said, wow, that's an amazing thing that you're asking me. I said, but I first of all have to actually ask my husband because he thinks we're going to France. So he said to me, well, I'll give you an hour to agree or not. And he said, if I don't hear from you, I'll assume you've accepted and I'll announce it. So I said to him, thanks for that. So variously I managed to find my husband, and he said, how could you not? He said, people know you and they trust you. How could you not? And so commenced an amazing journey that I'm still on in many ways. I still sit on the Red Cross Bushfire Fund and still know people in the communities, and so it goes. And so since that time when I finished up acting as a volunteer in the Bushfire Authority as well, I then moved I was on Monash University Council, and now I'm Deputy Chancellor. And I also chair a wonderful organisation called Monash College, which is an area where it brings many international students into Australia and then into the university. And I also chair an organisation called Good Shepherd Microfinance. And before I go on to talk about what I'm really here for, I wanted to say something about that. About 2.5 years ago, the sisters approached me, the Good Shepherd sisters. And they said, we've 30 years ago started a process of loaning people our own money in no interest loans. And for up to about $1,500, we gave no interest loans. And originally they gave about $20,000 of their own money. And people, I'm sure their accountants, said to them, you never get the money back. But they did. And about 98% of the money was paid back. And so this program has continued, and about 11 years ago, Ahmed Farood, when he was the head of NAB, committed NAB to provide $110 million capital to be able to be loaned through Good Shepherd Microfinance. And at that stage, it was had a different name, but it was still the Good Shepherd Sisters Youth and Family Services. And so the sisters, when they finally asked me, they said, we think this has enormous potential, and we'd like you to chair it, and we'd like you to appoint a CEO, bring on board a group of people who can help, and we want people to know that these loans are available. And so that's what we've been doing over the last couple of years. We have 270 partners, Anglicare, Salvation Army, all those organisations across Australia are available where people can get loans, and 700 locations. And we're now trialling shops, and we're trying to make it available for people to know. So any of you ever come to a point where you think someone really does need that support, please don't send them to payday lenders. Please don't send them to Rent to Buy, where you can buy a fridge. You can get a loan for a fridge off us for $700, $800, and in Rent to Buy you can pay $2,500 for the same thing. That's called exploitation, and there are 3.4 million people in this country who are financially excluded. That means they don't have access to credit, they have no insurance, and in many cases when a problem occurs, they're in serious financial trouble. And so it's one of those organisations that I think is amazing. Some of you might have seen Professor Muhammad Yunus recently in Australia. He talked about the difference that microfinancing, microcredit had made in Bangladesh, and was given the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And so we've recently part of bringing to Australia to try and encourage this issue. We've been working with some CPA people on this, and hopefully there may be a way in the future for us to continue to work with you. And that's one of the things that I've been doing, and I guess it's been an amazing experience for me. And so my life and my career, I suppose there's another stream from the very, very beginning when I joined the police, and that was about women. When I was one of 130, and that just a little while before I joined, if you got married, you had to leave. And whilst I joined, in the early days, if you had a baby, you had to leave as well. We had a limited range of opportunities, and I guess I've been part for within policing, and then the way women have been policed. And so for the last, 40 years now, a bit more really, I've been keen to think about how women are treated in leadership and how the issue of leadership develops. And I thought I wanted to talk about three things, and there is a question time at the end, and so I'm very happy to share about that. Just to kind of put things on the table, and I know some of you may or may not agree, but there is some amazing research around that says there is no difference between men and women in their capacities to be leaders. Now, there shouldn't have to be research that suggests that. That should be just a fact. But that's what the research says, and it's quite overwhelming. And any of the differences one might see are socialised researchers. And just as an example of that, I was asked to go to a school a while ago as part of a fundraising at a girls' school. And they were fundraising for equipment for science labs. And I said to them, how many of the girls go on to university to study science? They said about 50%. I went, wow, that's amazing. How come that's happened? They said, because the nuns said they were going to do that. So those girls in that location studied science because someone told them they could, instead of, in some cases, telling them they couldn't. And there's a great book by Cordelia Fine called Illusions of Gender, and she goes through study after study after study that simply says there are no differences in the capability. And so I guess underpinning what I want to say is simply that. There are no differences, and we construct differences. And a while ago I was asked to kind of think about this in a bit of detail, and what I think is important is three streams that I think about women, and part of it you'll get the sense about leadership as well. So the first bit I think we have to think about is what stops good people becoming leaders. And it can be men or women. It can be people from minority backgrounds. It can be a whole range of people who might get stopped and not able to use their skills and capacities perhaps in the way that they hoped, and perhaps the way many of you might as well. And I suppose I've watched this over time in lots of different ways, and I'll use the police as an example of some of these issues. So when I came into Victoria Police, I was interviewed by the media and various questions asked, and one of the journalists said to me, "So are you going to stop supporting women now?" I said, "Seriously?" I said, "No, I'm in the best place I've ever been to be able to do that." But I was always a bit taken by that question and why. And so one of the things after a while of being in the police and trying to figure out where we were going and asking the people in the organisation what they thought, what the government thought, what the community thought, I said, look, every time I go to graduations, what I look at is just principally men. So how come we can't bring on board more women? And it's what in fact we're going to do is we're going to have a target that 25% of the sworn recruits coming into policing have to be women. And my HR people said, you have to go to the court and get an exemption for that. I said, right. So we went to the court, Police Association fought me, and we lost. And I said, tough luck. We're going to have 25%. And so we headed on that track. But one of the things you have to figure out when you work on that track is I kept going to graduations every fortnight and I didn't see changes. And I called up my recruiting people. I said, what do you think the barriers are? Do women not want to apply? They said, well, since you've been here and since we've been doing some advertising, which we had, about 40% of the applications are female. I said, well, they're pretty smart, they're pretty reasonable. How come I don't see that number coming in class? And they said, there could be various barriers. And I said, like what? And they said, well, you have to go to a police station and do an interview. And the senior sergeants interview them. I said, what happens then? He said, about 20% drop out. I said, right. I said, then what happens? He said, well, they come in and they go through the background checks and they get out to the academy. I said, do they? He said, yep. So what happens then? He said, well, they do physical tests. And he said, and then there's probably one barrier that's a bit difficult for them. And I said, what's that? He said, it's the wall. I said, what wall? I said, the wall, I said, what wall? And they said, 7-foot high wall. So what happens? And he started to laugh. He said, they're a bit like lemmings. I said, are they? And he said, yes, they throw themselves at the wall. And then they fall over. So what happens then? He said, they go away. So what happens then? He said, they never come back. I said, right, I've got the answer. And he said, what's that? I said, we'll get rid of the wall. And he said, we can't, we'll be in trouble. I said, I'm the Chief Commissioner, we'll be fine. And I called up the academy and said to the head of the academy, get rid of the wall for me today. He said, we'll be in trouble. I said, shut up and get on with it. So the following day, the newspapers, Chief Commissioner lowering standards. I said, no, I'm not, I'm getting rid of it. It's not lowering at all. And so next thing I find myself at the academy with the wall. You've got to wonder. And we did get rid of it. And strangely enough, the numbers went in. And from 14% when I joined till 28% when I left, that's what happened. And I guess what I'm talking to you about is systems and practices that stop people being able to achieve. And if any of you think that merit-based interview is a reality, forget it. It just isn't the case. In vast numbers of organisations, there is no merit-based. It's got a whole bunch of other stuff that goes with it. And that's what often stops good people going through. The job requirements that says you have to have this and this and this. I worked for Defence, well, I didn't work actually, I volunteered to help Defence for a while on a panel of women that they'd asked to come in and help them advise. And one of the requirements for a role in Defence in the top 40 senior positions was that you had to fly a particular kind of jet. And I kind of said, what do you have to fly the jet for? Do any of you all fly the jets? Oh no, not anymore, we're too old. I said, but you did fly the jets. I said, oh yes, it's very important to fly the jets. And because as you can imagine, I said to them, what a lot of rubbish. To manage a big organisation, thousands and thousands of people, you don't need to know how to fly a jet. And so there are those kind of requirements. I guess flexibility is another issue. The number of people who don't seem to be able to figure out part-time work is beyond me. When I was in the New South Wales Police, I remember I became HR, we got flexible work, we got flexible career breaks, a whole lot of stuff available to the whole organisation. And people came and said to me, nobody's taking it up. I came to understand that what happened was that if you agreed locally, then that was fine. But if you disagreed, then the person wasn't allowed to work part-time, male or female. We had maternity leave, and that was a part of it, but this was different. And so I said, that's easy. They said, what are you going to do? I said, well, simply, if it's agreed locally, that's fine. And if the local supervisor can't agree, they can come into my office and explain to me why they can't figure it out. So what do you think happened? Nobody came to visit. because nobody wanted to be told that that I couldn't believe they weren't smart enough to figure out flexible work arrangements. And so all of a sudden, from a very small number, both men and women were able to be part of the flexible work conditions. So I guess what I'm saying about this bit about systems is what stops good people is often crap systems. And I guess there's great evidence around that. I don't guess, there is great evidence, and it's an important part. I think there's a second piece too, and that's about men. And it's lovely to see so many men here. I know that there are more men CPAs than women, but certainly there are more women coming into the profession, as I understand it, about 55% coming out of classes, out of universities, and I think that's a wonderful thing to see. But I remember giving a speech a while ago up at a club in Collins Street, and it was for a father-daughter dinner, and I was required to think about some of the things that dads might do. I guess for you who are dads or partners or have sisters or female cousins or female colleagues, then you might want to think about what role you play in supporting those women. My dad, who was the senior police officer in New South Wales, didn't want me to join, but after a while he got used to me being in and then became a great advocate. He's Second World War, he's 88 years old, and he looked around and watched me when I was younger. He said, "Christine, they're trying to do you in." And he said, "It's not right." He said, "I've encouraged you, I've developed you, it's not right." And he became a great advocate for women. And so maybe brothers and dads and husbands need to think about that. Because in many cases, the people who will stop women becoming professors, board members, partners in organisations, CEOs, will be people who are in fact women's husbands, brothers, fathers and sons. And so maybe what they might do is think about sponsoring a woman. Not just being a mentor, but saying, "Give Christine a go. Let her have a try at that role." Maybe they might think about equal pay. Equal pay. I cannot believe I was at a lawyer's function for legal women the other day, and the evidence is that women coming out of universities get paid on average 17% less than men coming out of universities. Like, seriously. How can anybody in this room or anybody in HR departments let that happen? Like, what is that about? How do you make a judgment to pay someone who graduated from law school less money, or someone who graduates from business and economics faculty at Monash University or RMIT University or any of those wonderful universities we have in this state, in this country, and pay them less because they happen to be a female or someone perhaps from a minority background? I guess maybe you'd also might want to take a position that says, like a secretary in one of the departments in Victoria has said, "I want 50% of the senior team to be female." Maybe someone takes a stand like that. Or they might take a stand against harassment and suggest that it's not appropriate and simply on occasion say, "We don't do that around here." That would make it a better place to work. And they might figure out flexible work practices so that their wife or their friend or their granddaughter might be able to have a baby. I had a friend who was a senior police officer in Sweden. She was very blunt. She said, "Christine, do you think that men don't get that women have babies? Especially when they're involved?" I said, I don't know. I mean, how could we not get that women have babies? It's kind of natural. And why would they not want to be able to take some time off? And why would you want to throw away hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of skill and knowledge and capacity when all those women in the main want to work and they want to come back to work? I suppose the other part is then about the women themselves, about all of us. I guess this, in a sense, the leadership piece around this for me is about trying to, if you're a good leader and a good manager, you've got to be developing and encouraging people. I learned the best leaders respect people and they cause them to do things that people never imagined themselves. John Avery was someone like that for me. He pushed me to go to university, he pushed me to go to scholarship, he pushed me to apply for jobs. This is a very shy, quiet man who just said to me, "Christine, I think you're capable of it." He said, that's amazing leadership. Leadership for me is not about being out there on the horse, charging ahead and following me. That model of leadership was how many people got excluded. Many of our leaders came out of the Second World War and they had a military command and control model. Well, the world changed. And so did most of us. And I'm not an advocate for the idea that leaders are born. We didn't just pop out and, gee, I can be in charge. It's about leaders are made and leaders are developed. And we learn to start with how to lead. We practice, we try things, they work sometimes, but all of us can step up and be leaders. And when I was managing Victoria Police, this is what I was trying to do, to get Victoria Police to see they all could be leaders. And they could all be part, and they are leaders, of thinking about the way to change, the way to do better. So in women's case, what I've learned about women is what helps women is a sense of purpose, a sense of belief in themselves. Development of networks and sponsors and supporters and partners so that they'll help those women achieve. And that's what helped me. Any leader you've ever seen, no matter who they are, has never done it alone, trust me. There's always someone there. There's always someone supporting and helping. My dad, who when I was in the police, used to send me emails saying, "Christine, you've stuffed it up." So thanks, Dad. Can you read the other paper? Or you could have my mum, Julia Gillard, when she was Prime Minister, launch my book. And Julia got an enormous amount of heat about how dare she take the time to launch my book. She gave a great speech which didn't get covered. Lots of criticism from a whole range of the usual suspects who said she shouldn't launch the book. But my mum couldn't come to the launch. And she sent a message with Dad to say, if all else fails, Christine, you can come home. I said, Mum, I'm 58. But you know you need those supporters. And what I've watched about the best leaders I've also learned is they don't get carried away by themselves. You get no right to think you're better than someone else. None of us. Absolutely none. I've met the richest and I've met the poorest and I've travelled a lot around the world. I've met some of the most amazing leaders and some of the most appalling leaders. The ones who are really best have absolutely no belief they're better. They've got skills and knowledge and capacities, but leadership is not about privilege or wealth or rank or any of those things. It's about responsibility. And recognising that the people you're trying to lead have enormous capacity themselves and trying to encourage them to develop that capacity is the best I've seen in leadership. I think leadership's about having a go. It's about a resilience. Sometimes you'll get knocked over. That's happened to me once or twice. And you've got to pick yourself up. I remember once after the Royal Commission, I was criticised, obviously, in the Bushfires Royal Commission for a range of things. And I was on a tram in Collins Street. And a kid got on the tram and he said, "You shouldn't have gone to dinner." A couple of people on the tram said, "Shut up, kid, and get off." And he did. You know, it's that other people stand up occasionally. One of the things I talk about a bit is in leadership you have capital. And sometimes you've got to use it. You know that I marched in the Gay Pride March. I did it simply to support our members. I did not understand that it would have caused the difficulties and the problems that it appeared to for many people. And I remember my media director came in and he said to me, "Christine, you know, you'll ruin your reputation." I went, "Right." And then the minister called me and I said, "Minister, are you going to march with me?" He said, "No, you'll ruin your reputation." And then Dad rang and went, "Oh no." I said, "Thanks, Dad, but you're wrong in this case." And so I marched. I remember that there were death threats to me for marching. And so more police had to march. I don't know whether they liked it a lot, but they did. But the difference it made, you know. So I guess the other thing I know about leadership is sometimes you have to have some courage and step up. You're going to step up sometimes and you look around and there might not be a lot of people with you, but you'll know what you did was right. You'll know that we're a better organisation because you stepped up and perhaps just pushed that boundary. You have to overcome the limits. And some of the limits will have a real and some are not. But what leaders do is figure out how the barriers that are not real, the barriers that cause problems, can actually be gotten rid of. And whether it's a 7-foot-high wall or whether it's a whole series of other limits that stop people achieving and organisations being the best they can be, that's what leaders have to do, is figure out what those limits are and just allow all of the wonderful flourishing that can go on, that people are not harmed. Because also, I hope and think that leaders don't settle for second best. When you get the chance to manage and lead people, it's a rare privilege, trust me. And it's even a rarer privilege when you get a chance, like I did, to lead people through the bushfires. Some of the people here today were part of a team who worked with us in the bushfires. And they were the most amazing team to work with. And so many other people just stepped up and helped, and gave their love and support and money, and they didn't want to settle for second. I guess the other piece I suppose I wanted to say about women is that it is about the three issues: the systems, about the support, and then it's about us. And I teach women in leadership programs now, and I know that sometimes we don't have the confidence. And I remember just one story. When I was very young, I was asked put an application in to work in operational policing. And the senior women called me into their office and they said, "Well, Christine, you've done it now." I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, the Commissioners agreed to have a trial of women in operational policing." And when we first proposed this, I had this idea that we might go to somewhere like sort of a suburb where you could shop. That didn't turn out to be the case. They sent me to the most difficult police station at that stage in the Southern Hemisphere, which was Darlinghurst in King's Cross in Sydney. And I remember walking out of there and I was afraid. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, what have I done this time? I've really stuffed it. And they said to me, "Christine, it'll be a disaster. You'll be assaulted. Nobody would pay any attention to you. You'll be back in here in 3 months' time in tears." And they convinced me I couldn't do it. And they convinced me to be afraid. And I remember walking outside the front of police headquarters in Sydney and walking across the park in tears. And a detective sergeant came up to me, a woman, been around a long time. And she said to me, "What's the matter with you?" And I told her what had happened. And she said, "Oh, Christine, you're no dumber than the blokes. You'll be all right." So thanks for that. And I guess the other piece I wanted to talk about is being afraid. You see people who want to make you afraid. They'll want you to doubt yourself. They'll say things about you. They'll ridicule you. I'm pretty sure that there isn't anybody in the room who's had to put up with that as much as I have. If Julia Gillard was here, she probably would win. But, it's all about making you afraid. It's making you doubt yourself. It's making you back off. And this isn't just women. I've seen big, tall police officers who were unnecessarily afraid. So you really have to figure out what that fear's about. So what if they say something nasty about you? If they say something that it's true and you believe it, then you take note of it. But the cynicism, the nasty carping, the stuff on the web, all that stuff is just there to design to stop you, to put you back in the box, to not let you achieve what's to achieve. Because speaking up and stepping up is a really important part. I guess finally, too, you've got to have a belief in what you're trying to do. Because I think if we're able, for all of us, who actually have capacities to lead and to manage well, then our society and our communities would be so much better if we just treated each other fairly and decently and equally, and we gave people the chances they deserve. Thanks very much.
You can stay there, Christine.
My instructions.
You've got I've just overruled you. I'm the Chief Commissioner. You can do as you're told. We've got 10 minutes or so of questions with Christine. So there's a very big room here, and one of the joys of this job is having the roving mic in that corner and getting a question over in this corner. If we got any questions, hands up. All quiet, like an auction, isn't it? There? No.
No, that's the lady with the microphone.
Well, of course, I've got lots of... Oh, where? Jodie spotted one here.
This one in the front.
You've got better eyes than I have, Christine. Can I borrow those glasses of yours, please?
I think you're younger than me.
Hi, Christine. Hello, Christine. I just have one question. What advice would you give to someone going into leadership position for the first time?
Thank you. So the question, just in case you didn't hear, was what advice would I give someone going into a leadership position for the first time? I think there's a couple of things. Some I've sort of said, but I just reiterate a couple. I think the first of it is to, if you've got the job or you've been appointed to the role or you've got sort of stepped into a particular position, then the first part is to actually make sure that you get to meet the people you're going to lead, that you take some time to get to hear them, that you take some time to get to listen to the kind of of issues. I remember early days when I was in the New South Wales Police, I managed a team. First time I went from 5 to 300, and I was very keen to meet sort of leaders of each of these areas and listen to what they have to say. So I think the first bit is to that. It's also about looking at the sort of evidence and research about what's the best way you want to do something, and that becomes part of it. And then I think once you've kind of done all that and you've figured out, then it says, okay, this is where we're going to go. And then you push forward on that and you hold people accountable for delivering on it. People like feedback, they like to know where they're up to, and my sense is you then support the people to do the job. There's a great piece of research Telstra did, and that was that the first bit was what people wanted was to know that someone who was leading or managed them knew where the organisation was going. The second bit was they wanted to know what you want me to do, what's my bit, and the third bit was they wanted support to do it. So I guess if you kind of understood those three bits, that might help a new leader take on that role. Thanks.
Very good, Christine. I was interested in your comments about the media, and I noticed the venomous way in which certain elements of the media treated you during your role. Just your resilience during those periods. There must have been days where you thought, look, I've just had enough of this. How did you get through some of that constant criticism and abuse?
I think it was... I think initially the media wanted it to work. They're actually reasonably supportive in some cases in the early days. But I suppose what I sometimes thought, sometimes we did stuff and I just want to stay in bed and pull the sheet over my head, and I can hear my mother saying, you got yourself into it, get yourself out of it. Okay, get up, Christine. And so I think part of it is just to say, I'm not going to hand myself over to those people. They don't know anything about policing. They have agendas. I'm not prepared to just kind of let them win. And I think that was a part of the process. I think there are a lot of people who were supporting what we were trying to do, and I think that helps you along the way. I've been reading Julia Gillard's book, and she talks about having a purpose and important reasons to do things, and I figured that's what I had as well. With the bushfires, after the Royal Commission, they wanted me to step down from the authority, and I wouldn't do that because the bushfire people very clearly, there were a few otherwise, but most of them said they kind of knew and trusted me and they wanted me to stay. And so I think that sense of support you get, a sense that you know you've done this before. I guess when I started, when I was sort of 19 at this stuff of pushing boundaries, by the time you get to nearly 60, you figure out that you can cope and you can survive, and that not everybody's looking at you. I have people these days who come up to me and say, so how are you still enjoying being the police commissioner? I go, well, I haven't been the police commissioner for 5 years now. Oh, we thought you were. So you can sometimes get a bit carried away by yourself as well and thinking how important and how obvious it must be. And I think not everybody's looking at you and not everybody pays attention to what you do all the time, and maybe that helps as well. Thanks.
Okay. Can you spot any other questions out there, seeing your eyes are more eager than mine?
There you go. This on table 14.
I feel like reading the Brownlow votes out up here, don't we? Nixon, 3 votes.
Hi, Christine. Thanks very much for that. It was really interesting. I'm interested in your view. Many women get to, say, senior middle management. I think an increasing number of women I perceive get to that sort of senior middle management rung, but very few take whatever the next step is to get into the next level. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas you can share with us about what that potential reason might be.
Yeah. I think there's some really interesting research I think I saw the other day which talked about that kind of level being the level where numbers of women stop. And I suppose some of the things I looked at were, and already talked about, maybe to reinforce, were sometimes the systems that choose who gets to go to those next levels. I didn't realise until a while ago that the reason I got promoted in a range of positions was because they were big external panels. I got the Chief Commissioner's job because it was an external panel. There was people like Mick Palmer from the AFP, there was an academic, there was a range of people on the panel. Same with the New South Wales Police job as Assistant Commissioner. It was a 6-7 person panel. I think that it is about who chooses. And in some cases the women will not put themselves forward because they're not got enough confidence, and I think they have to kind of have a confidence to have a go, and if you don't get it... I applied for the South Australian job and didn't get it, thank God. And and I applied for the New South Wales job, and I thought, you missed the best person who should have had the job. I mean, I think you've got to put yourself forward. Like, nothing happens if you don't get it. You go, so what? They didn't choose me. But I think the piece that happens is sometimes we don't step up and have a go. I think the second part is sometimes the systems we step up into aren't fair. And we changed the system in the New South Wales Police for selecting superintendents, and we just simply gave you a number. You went through a series of assessments, and we didn't know who the people were until the end. And then we nominated the top 80, and we put them into the top 80 positions. You'll be shocked to know that people from a whole range of backgrounds and women got promoted through a system that was anonymous. I mean, there's a wonderful story about that anonymous stuff about orchestras. And it was an interesting example that women weren't getting roles in orchestras in the numbers that should have for the number of women who were very good musicians. And they simply decided a process. They put a barrier up between the selection committee and the musician, put the barrier up in front of them, and the musicians were told not to wear high heels. And when they came in and played, well, you'll be shocked to know that 50% of the people who got the jobs then were women. So I guess you have to try and get the barriers overcome, and we have to put ourselves forward and have a go at it. And I think they're the kind of two things that perhaps need to be worked on. But thanks.
More questions right over the back here, I think. I hope I'm getting these in order.
Over here.
Can you read that table number, Christine? You're showing off there before quoting table numbers.
No.
No? Either gonna.
Christine, I just wanted to
Whatever
ask.
Jody says.
This one.
6.
Just asking, what do you think was most critical to overcoming some of the prejudices during your career?
So can you just slower?
What do you think was most critical that you felt was key in overcoming some of the prejudices during your career?
I think I learned pretty early. I think you asked me what helped me overcome some of the problems.
The prejudices.
The prejudice.
Right. What was critical?
I think you learn enough about the prejudice. Like when I went to Darlinghurst, there was 400 blokes and 3 of us. And we were pretty obvious, and we never worked on the same shift, the girls were always different. And there was stuff, we were there to sort of undermine a whole bunch of people, and sometimes you've got to let some of it go. So I guess the first one, I'm not a cricketer, but my husband tells me that you've got to let some go through to the keeper. So, you just got to let him go sometimes. And others you'll take a stand on, and I remember taking a stand in Darlinghurst and saying, everybody swore all the time. And I said to them at one stage, I don't want you swearing anymore around me. And they all looked at me and swore at me. I went, so much for that, But I got to say the behaviour improved. Not only by the police, but by the drunks and a lot of other people who got arrested, things improved. So I guess it's about setting your own boundaries, taking a stand on some issues that I've found over time. Gradually you get better at it, you get better practiced at it, and you can gradually kind of overcome some of that discrimination and barriers. I remember once I was in a police station and a guy was giving me an incredibly hard time way at the back of the police station. And I'm sure I would have been okay, but it kind of got very tricky. And then all of a sudden around the corner walked two of the guys that I knew really well. And they were huge, big policemen. And they picked this guy up, he was a detective sergeant, and they took him to the door of the police station and they threw him out. They said, we don't do that around here. I went, yay! I said to the guys, I would have been fine, thanks, I said, at least have the decency to say thank you, Christine, And you see, it's sometimes that. It is, in fact, simply about, someone else picks up that for you and says, we don't do that around here. And I think, sometimes I've fallen off and gone off into the side for a while. I kind of, you hit into the siding because it's just got a bit much for you. And then I kind of got back on the track again and headed off. So I think you just learn and you get kind of stronger at it. You get focused about what you're trying to do. You get a thicker skin. But there are some things you've got to set boundaries about. One of the things about leadership, I reckon, is really important. You've got to figure out what the boundaries are about for you and for an organisation. And you set those boundaries, people know that they're not going to, be able to go past those because they're really important to you. And I suppose a lot of that's helped me get to the point and then having a go. If it didn't work out, all else fails, I could drive a truck. I can do more than drive a truck these days. But that's what I used to think when I was young.
Time for one more question if we can.
There's one over there.
Christine, you're on the ball. That's table number 9, Christine. I can see that. I'm good with numbers.
You should be, I hope. You're not being my accountant anymore.
Hey, Christine. I'd like to firstly thank you for what was a wonderful acknowledgement of country. It is, as an Indigenous man, it's often you turn up to events and you don't hear someone give an acknowledgement such heart, so thank you for that. I also want to talk about and ask you, in Indigenous circles at the moment, it's quite similar to what you would have went through when you first started your role as a woman in a police office. We face the same problems that you guys went through then, and I'm really keen to find out what you think the biggest issue for diversity and cultural diversity is now facing us as we enter a really important time in Australian history.
I think I got cultural diversity.
That's correct, yep.
I suppose for a long time within the New South Wales Police, I was a strong advocate for diversity and for understanding that policing, of course, would be a much, much, much better occupation if it were reflecting the community we policed. And so I suppose there were lots of different ways that you try and do this. It makes good sense in our cultures and communities. It makes good sense in a lot of ways. The early days in Victoria Police, we had some real issues around 9/11 and alienation of different communities, particularly the Muslim community. And I remember thinking, okay, how are we going to do this? Because, we need to bring together the elders. We need to bring together a range of people who can help us. We formed a multi-faith council. 60 different faiths came together, and we were able to, that still exists actually, to be able to bring leaders together. And the imams that were very important within communities, we spoke to as well. And no matter what the sort of religious diversity, we used to work with them as well in a multi-faith and multicultural committees that advised us. So I suppose it's also about, stepping up and being able to show your respect for country, your respect for people's diversity and the strengths that they bring. I remember we got into one really difficult situation, and a couple of the imams said, we're happy to be in the police cars with your police if you like, if that helps you, deal with situations. And it did. And I guess same with Aboriginality. I was asked when I first came to Victoria, what football team do you want to support? And Essendon and Collingwood and lots of others came along. And in the end, I became the number 1 ticket holder for Rumballara Football Netball Club, which is in Shepparton. And they won by, you'd like to know, the other day in the grand final, unlike some of those other clubs that I mentioned. And so it is about, I suppose what leaders have to do is, sometimes step out and also figure out these issues, name them, figure out what the bias might look like and what damage it's being done to people in our communities. And, when I sort of work with the gay and lesbian and transsexual, bisexual communities, it's about recognising them and their strengths, and it can have an amazing consequence for people's lives when someone does. So thank you.
Thanks. I think, have we got someone waving profusely over here for one question? Is that okay with Jodie? Jodie, who's my boss, his last name's Hunter, so I'd like to take notice of what she says. No, she's not here to overrule, so we'll run with this one quickly if we can.
Hi, Christine. I just wanted to ask you, there are barriers in workplaces, as you mentioned, but why would an organisation want to suppress the fine attributes of a young individual who's in a perspective as a future leader? Why would they? And they're so hard to come by these days.
So why would an organisation suppress the attributes of a woman? What's the commercial motivation?
What a great question. There's a whole bunch of women in this room who'd like to know the answer too, I think.
You might just repeat that question.
The question we understand was, why would an organisation suppress the sort of talent and capacity of a woman and not pay them the same, or I think was part of that question, or not allow them to continue working? Is that the essence of it?
Yeah. For both genders.
For both genders.
For both genders, why would you?
Yeah, look, I think it is about systems and practices, and a little while ago, one of the boards I chair, we hired a new woman to work in an organisation, and she's just an outstanding candidate. And we said to her, how much do you want to be paid? And anyway, she said what she wanted, and we actually had about $30,000 more that we could have paid her. And we said, oh, okay, so we, did that. And then the CEO and I walked away afterwards and said, we can't live with ourselves if we didn't pay her what we thought she was worth, and actually gave her the $30,000 extra. I think you have to consciously go, what's happened? Why am I losing this talent and skill and capacity? I mean, one of the things that happens in policing for women now is they now stay longer than men. We finally overcame the drift and the moving on, and now they'll actually stay longer. The deputy commissioners in here, 3 kids, one of the assistant commissioners has 3 more. Look, I don't know why. It's about bias, it's about prejudice, it's about not thinking, it's about systems. But if somebody consciously said, why am I paying this person less, why am I not valuing, their work, then maybe that might be enough to say, then let's pay them properly, let's figure out how we can use this skill and talent. I mean, I'm not one who's ever figured out why people do it. I've just tried to figure out why they should stop doing it.
Thank you. Okay, we might wrap that up. No further questions, I'm afraid. I notice Christine's got a copper with a black book here, a little black book. I remember my name went in a little black book for riding a bike without a light when I was about 12, and I'm still having nightmares about it. Teresa, it was. Yes.
Small gift, Christine. Thank you very much. I think the main thing I got from Christine's inspirational speech is I think we should all think about sponsoring a woman. So have a think about that when you go back to work today, or someone from the family. So sponsor a woman. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks very much. Thank you.